Hi guys, we have reached section 3 of chapter 9 and we're going to take a look at Teddy Roosevelt's square deal. Looking back at section 1, we learned that a muckraker is a journalist who wrote about the corrupt side of business. Upton Sinclair began doing research in 1904 focusing on the human condition of the stockyards in Chicago. He intended his book to reveal what Sinclair refers to as the breaking of human hearts by a system that exploits the labor of men and women for profits. In 1906, when his book The Jungle, which we will be watching a movie version in class, it was published, and America was shocked to learn about the sickening conditions of the meatpacking industry. Roosevelt was among the many Americans who saw the dangers as well as the nauseating occurrences that were taking place. He decided to invite Sinclair to the White House and promised he would be implementing the necessary changes. Reform in the meatpacking industry was one of the many congressional acts led by Roosevelt in his square deal policies. Roosevelt had always been both ambitious and fearful. When President McKinley was assassinated in 1901 and Roosevelt took over, he was determined to use his personality and popularity to make needed changes in America. He believed it was the president's responsibility to take care of things like national welfare, and also believed the federal government should assume control when states proved incapable of dealing with problems, which was a very, very, very new way of thinking. Roosevelt used the presidency to influence the media and Congress. He then created what was called the square deal, which made sure if big business victimized workers that it would be fixed and no longer happen. Among the square deal were many new reforms, which include changes to trust busting, arbitration, railroads, health and environment, the Pure Food and Drug Act, National Park Service, and civil rights. By 1900, trusts, which were legal bodies created to hold stock in many companies, they controlled about 4/5 of the industries in the United States. Although Congress had passed the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890, the act's vague language made enforcement really difficult. Although the Roosevelt administration filed 44 antitrust suits, winning a number of them and breaking up some of the trusts, it was unable to slow the merger movement in business. When 140,000 coal miners in Pennsylvania went on strike and demanded a 20% raise, a 9-hour workday, and the right to organize a union, the mine operators refused to bargain with them. In response, Roosevelt personally met with coal miners and mine owners during the coal strike of 1902. He threatened them that he would have the United States government take over the mine if the strike was not settled. What President Roosevelt did, he demonstrated something new. From then on, when a strike threatened the public welfare, the federal government was expected to intervene. His actions also reflected the progressive belief that disputes could be settled in an orderly way with the help of experts such as those on the Arbitration Commission. In 1887, Congress had passed the Interstate Commerce Act, which prohibited wealthy railroad owners from colluding to fixed high prices by dividing the business in a given area. It was set up to enforce the new law, but in reality had very little power. With Roosevelt's urging, Congress passed the Elkins Act in 1903 and the Hepburn Act in 1906. Each of these aided in the railroad regulation and boosted government's power to regulate the railroads. President Roosevelt's enthusiasm and his considerable skill at compromise led to laws and policies that benefited both health and the environment. After reading The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, Roosevelt responded to the public's clamor for action. He appointed a commission of experts to investigate the meatpacking industry, and in 1906, the Meat Inspection Act was dedicated to strict cleanliness requirements for meatpackers and created the program of federal meat inspection. Another reform that made its way into Roosevelt's square deal was the Pure Food and Drug Act. Not only did manufacturers claim their products accomplished everything from curing cancer to growing hair, in addition, popular children's medicines often contained opium, cocaine, and alcohol. In 1906, Congress passed the Pure Food and Drug Act, which halted the sale of contaminated foods and medicines and called for truth in labeling. Another major focus of Roosevelt's was American conservation and natural resources. Before his presidency, the federal government had paid very little attention to the nation's natural resources. In the late 19th century, Americans had short-sightedly exploited their natural environment. Roosevelt worked to condemn the view that Americans' resources were endless and made conservation a primary concern. Roosevelt also set aside 148 million acres of forest reserves. He also set aside 1.5 million acres of water power sites and another 80 million acres of land that experts from the United States Geological Survey would explore the mineral and water resources. Although Roosevelt's concerns for the environment were extremely strong, in almost 2 terms as president, Roosevelt, like most other progressives, failed to support civil rights for African Americans. He hired few black men and women, and he did hire a couple in the local government, but angered them when he dismissed an entire regiment of African American soldiers accused of conspiracy in protecting others and charged with murder in Texas. Next, we move on to Section 4 to continue our examination of progressivism under Taft. After winning the election in 1904, Roosevelt pledged not to run for re-election in 1908. He handpicked his Secretary of War, William Howard Taft, to run against William Jennings Bryan, who had been nominated by the Democrats for the 3rd time in a row. Taft and the Republicans won an easy victory. As President Taft pursued a cautiously progressive agenda, seeking to consolidate rather than expand Roosevelt's reform. Even after accomplishing the busing of over 90 trusts in a 4-year term, it did not improve his popularity. He confessed in a letter to Roosevelt he never felt like the president. When Taft was campaigning, he ran on a platform of lowering tariffs, a staple of the progressive agenda. When the House passed the Payne bill, which lowered rates on imported manufactured goods, the Senate proposed an alternate bill, the Aldrich bill, which made fewer cuts and increased many rates. In turn, this infuriated the progressive wing of his party. Between the progressives who sought change and the conservatives who did not, Taft's cautious nature made it impossible for him to hold together. By midterm elections of 1910, the Republican Party was in shambles. After Roosevelt saw the lack of progressive progress Taft had made in 2 years as president, he proclaimed a new nationalism under which the federal government would exert its power for welfare of the people. By 1912, Roosevelt had decided to run for a 3rd term as president. Although Taft held the incumbency advantage, many Republicans refused to vote for Taft and decided to form a new 3rd party called the Progressive Party. They nominated Roosevelt for president, and the party quickly began being referred to as the Bull Moose Party. After a journalist asked Roosevelt if he was ready for a 3rd term, he responded by saying he was as ready as a bull moose. The party's platform advocated for things that we've been discussing in class, things like the direct election of senators, the initiative, recall, women's suffrage, 8-hour workday, a federal law against child labor, and a few others. Although Roosevelt had strong supporters, the split of the Republican Party handed Woodrow Wilson and the Democrats their first real chance at the White House since 1892. Roosevelt supported government action to supervise big business, but did not oppose all business monopolies, while Wilson supported small business and a free market competition and characterized all business monopolies as evil. Although Wilson captured only 42% of the popular vote, he won an overwhelming electoral victory and a Democratic majority in Congress, granting the Democrats control of the White House for the first time in 18 years.